when I was 9 years old, I asked my mother about the picture that is sitting in the shelf in our living room. Is this my father? She said, yes. It's a picture of him as a soldier during the war. The picture was a small black and white photograph with a small golden frame around it. In it, my father looked very young. He wore a dark uniform and a cap, and on the brim was a skull. I thought to myself, why would someone wear such a creepy symbol? My father was funny sometimes. He liked to laugh. When we were watching TV together in the living room, my sister and I, we were lying on the carpet in front of the TV. My father was sitting on the sofa with his short gray hair, glasses, in a shirt, the sleeves were rolled up. He had put his jacket away, so to keep it tidy. My mother was sitting in the armchair, flickering through a magazine. She was a lot younger than my father. She had dark, short hair, looked a bit smart, intellectual. We were watching Laurel and Hardy. In Swedish, I guess it's Hellan or Halvan. And we were laughing a lot. My mother was laughing about us laughing. Often it wasn't fun. My sister and I, when we were in high school, we came home for lunch. My family lived above the bookstore that my parents owned. At lunchtime, my parents would come up from the store and we would sit around the big kitchen table. The window was facing the yard below. And one time when my sister and I were sitting on one side of the table, my parents were sitting on the other side, we started eating and my father said, I don't like to eat carrots. I had to eat so many during the war. My sister said, well, if you cook, then you can decide what you want to eat. My mother said, could we please eat in peace and quiet? My father said, no. This is not true. Germany was, when I was in the SS division, women liked us. We were good looking. Women liked German men. I said, come on, stop with always the same stories. You are turning history around. My father said, no, not Germany was not an aggressor. Russia attacked Germany because it was blah, blah, blah. By the time my mother had gotten up, left the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. After lunch, my mother went back into the kitchen. My father was in the living room taking a nap. The door was closed. My mother lit a cigarette, sat down at the kitchen table and said, don't shout at your father. But he shouted at me. Yes, but you have to be better than him. I asked her, did you know that he was in the SS when you married him? She said, yes, I knew, but we never talked about it. After a while, she stood up, put out her cigarette and said, I am convinced he never killed anyone. I started having dreams about my father. In my dreams, he wanted to kill me. He pointed a gun at me. I fought with him for the gun. When I finally managed to grab it, I threw it back at him, pointed it back at him. He went down on his knees and begged, don't shoot me, I'm in misery, please help me. It was always the same dream. And one evening I had dinner with my father, just the two of us. We were sitting on opposite sides of the kitchen table. We were having sandwiches. Each of us had a small wooden plate and a little sharp knife in front of us. my father talked about the prison camp where he had been after the war. He told me how badly they were treated, that the American soldiers didn't care whether they lived or died, and about that incident when one American officer had told him to obey orders or otherwise he would shoot him, and my father had said, shoot me, I don't care. I have heard this story. I had heard it 1,000 times. I said, stop telling me this story. You were not a victim. You were there because you were in the SS. He said, no, the SS was a international group. We were standing up for each other. I blurted out, you were victims. No, you were, yeah, that's it. You were criminals, that's what I said. You were not victims, you were criminals. And he shouted at me that behavior like mine would not have been tolerated during that time. Suddenly, I was up, standing. I was leaning over the kitchen table, and in my raised fist was the knife. My father looked at me, not sure whether I was serious or not. Was I serious? No. I sat back down, and we finished the dinner more or less in quiet. Many years later, I had moved away. I had broken off contact with my father for at least 2 years. My mother called and told me my father had died. So I went home for the funeral, and when I arrived, I wanted to see him one last time. So I asked my mother to make an appointment in the funeral home. And as soon as she told me I could go, I took my bike and I went there. It was in the middle of the cemetery, a building entirely made out of glass. The doors were open. I went inside. There was light coming from 2 sides. There was a coffin and flower bouquets on both sides. My father was there, propped up in a suit, and although he didn't like ties, they put a tie on him. I looked at him and I thought, he's not there anymore. So I left, I rode my bike into the woods, I sat down on a bench and I cried. Many years later, some things happened that made me think about my past, my father's past again. I started sleepwalking. I had a dream one night that I was trapped in a cellar, and I felt that there are a lot of bodies around me. And I struggled to get out, and wham, I had fallen off my loft bed. I was on the floor, my knee hurt, it was dark, I felt dizzy, but something in this dream made me think of my father's past. What had he really done? So I started investigating. I contacted databases and archives in Austria and Germany, and finally the German Federal Archive sent me a big orange envelope. And in the envelope were copies of documents that showed me what my father did. At the age of 17, as soon as he could, in 1940, he applied for the SS, and after he was accepted, he went to Germany for training, and then he joined SS Cavalry Division, who was going to Poland. This division, the commander of this division was Werner Fegelein, who was highly decorated for killing a great number of Jews and partisans during the war in the Polish marshlands. These things my father never talked about. So last Christmas I went home to visit my mother and my sister We were having coffee at the coffee house opposite of the house with the store and the flat where my mother still lived. We were sitting around a small table. We were having drinks. My mother was smoking. We talked about my father. And then I heard my mother say something I never thought I would hear her say. After we fell quiet for a short while, she said, "Everything is better since he died." That may be the end of my mother's story. What is the end for me? I don't know.